Hello, today I'm doing my writing year in review. Obviously, if you've been following my channel, you already know what I've worked on, but I still think it's fun to look back on. I think I spend a lot of my time throughout the year thinking about what I want to be doing and thinking about what I haven't yet accomplished. But in these wrap-ups, I'm able to kind of focus on what I have done. So when I was looking back on what I actually wrote this year, I feel like from a quantity standpoint, I didn't actually work on a ton of stuff. I think I was very focused on one project. I queried this year, so that was like a huge thing. So I think it was very different from other years for that reason, because I was like very head down on one project versus, writing a lot of different things. So I was kind of watching back my wrap-ups from last year, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that I had worked on so many different things. In my last couple of videos, I've always worked on, at least 2 books, like finishing one book and then starting another one. It was not really the case this year. Before we get into everything, I think one thing that I guess I do, I'm trying not to be hard on myself, but I do wish that I was, able to work on more short fiction this year. I think that was something that I really wanted to do last year, and I wasn't able to do it this year. I think what I did do this year is that I started a lot of different ideas. So yeah, in terms of regrets, I guess that's the only thing. So I guess we'll start with Sway With Me. My first short story was published. It's called Sway With Me Until We Bleed. It's a cyberpunk piece. Even though I finished writing it last year, it was published this year, and I went through like an editorial stage. So that's why I'm including it in this video, because I still worked on it this year and I made revisions to it before it was published. And I think the version that was published is, while it is like, I would say 90 or 80% the same as the draft that I first submitted, I do think like I made changes that were, even though they were at the line level, I think they definitely did elevate the piece. And I loved being able to go through that editing stage with a magazine. It was really, really fun. And for a piece like this that is intensely personal, I just felt like the story was very, very safe with their team. So yeah, last year I was watching my wrap-up. The piece had been accepted, but it wasn't published yet. They had actually bought Sway With Me, or they sent me the, acceptance email in September of last year. I couldn't include it in the immediate upcoming issue, but they were basically buying it for like 2 issues in advance, which was really surprising to me, but also a really kind of surreal experience, because even though they couldn't include it, they still wanted it enough to want to include it for the next issue. So when I was talking to my editor, or like the editor that I worked with on the piece, she was explaining that I think Sway With Me was sort of the first piece that they had bought for the issue, because they bought it so far in advance. But yeah, I just thought that was really cool. Even though I haven't reread Sway With Me since it's been published, or I skimmed it on the day that it was published, but I haven't read it since. I probably won't read it. If I ever read it again, it'll probably be years from now. I don't want to look at the piece and think about all the things that I would edit, because my writing style tends to, I don't want to say change every year, but I do, like when I look back on my writing from like, anywhere from like a 6 to 12 month period and beyond, I always see flaws in my writing. Next, let's talk about Local Heavens. Not much to say about this. I have like a bajillion vlogs. Local Heavens is an adult cyberpunk novel. The, TLDR of this project is I started writing this premise about 3 years ago. It was originally called Project Blanco, and I think if you watch some of my earlier videos, I might have mentioned it. If you watch my writing wrap up from last year, you'll know that I had just started that project in September of last year. And so I had written almost half of it by December of last year. I'm currently now on draft 3 of the project. But yeah, back in like 2020 or 2021 is when I technically first started writing this idea. It was originally called Project Blanco. That was before it had a title. At some point this year, I decided to title it Local Heavens. When I revisited the project this year, I actually completely rewrote it. The approach that I took with this idea is completely different from how I originally intended to write it. So that's why I don't count the draft from a few years ago. I don't actually count it as draft one, because that's like a completely different book to me. Even though it is the same premise, technically it is so not the same story. Yeah, I'm counting draft one from the draft that I started writing last year. I was writing draft one from September of 2022 to May 2023. I was not expecting to return to this premise last year. Like it wasn't something that was on my radar for half the year. And then when I had finished writing Sway With Me, which was in summer of 2022, I was very, very inspired by the ideas that I had brainstormed in that book. And I felt like I was a confident enough writer to return to the premise of Local Heaven. And Marcia, who is the main character of Sway With Me, really became the prototype character for a side character in Local Heavens. The happy sleep technology that I developed and the ideas that I was exploring in Sway With Me, those ended up being very core to the technology that is explored in Local Heavens. So if you've read Sway With Me, the happy sleep technology that is in that story plays a significant role in the plot and the themes of Local Heavens. So I actually see Sway With Me and Local Heavens as very connected in that way. Like it's not the same world. Local Heavens actually takes place in a reimagined version, I guess, of the US. So yeah, not quite the same world in that way. And also I will say that the writing style in Sway With Me and Local Heavens, they're very, very different. I'm pretty sure I wrote Sway With Me in third person, more of a contemporary voice, third person, present tense. Yeah, very commercial writing style. Whereas Local Heavens is first person. Technically, most of the book takes place in past tense. Originally thought that I was going to share the premise of Local Heavens around this time of the year, but I have decided not to, just because I'm still revising the book, and by the time I share the premise, I don't really want to be like working on the book deeply. So it might be something that I talk about in the new year. What I will say though is that I think the closest comp in terms of like thematically would probably be something like Black Mirror. It's a cyberpunk. So like if you like the kinds of technology, it defines the cyberpunk genre. I also think in terms of like sci-fi literary genre blend and kind of the intimacy and the queer yearning, in that way, I feel like you could comp it to something like This Is How You Lose the Time War. I would say like in general, if you like cyberpunk media, Local Heavens is a book that very much wears its inspirations on its sleeve. Like if you like a lot of Gibson's work, if you are dialed into a lot of popular cyberpunk media, the main character in Local Heavens is a netrunner. This is so off topic now, but something that's been funny about revising Local Heavens is that I've had people tell me like, you don't ever really stop to explain netrunning too much. Yeah, I don't. I really don't. I think I've taken for granted how much I've just assumed that because netrunning is not something that, you know, is unique to my story. It's a cyberpunk world building elements that was sort of created by William Gibson and has been adopted many times in a lot of different cyberpunk media. And I have taken for granted the fact that a lot of people are not familiar with the term or familiar with its previous iterations in other stories. And so part of my revision has had to be stopping to make it a little bit clearer. I am the type of writer that, and I only ever explain things to the degree that I feel like a reader needs to know about it. And whenever I talk to my beta readers, they're like, yeah, I was confused, but also I felt okay about being confused. But anyways, yeah, what else can I share about Local Heaven? Oh yeah, I queried it. I'm getting so off topic. I queried the book this year. I queried it in June. I signed with my agent in July or August. I can't remember. I was querying for about 6 weeks. I have a whole separate video on my query journey if you're curious. Yeah, that was probably the biggest milestone of the year, was signing with my agent. I signed with truly such a wonderful, wonderful agent. I feel so fortunate that I've been able to sign with an agent that is passionate about the story. I think the biggest reason why I haven't been able to work on as many new things as I wanted to this year was because my entire year has been very, very, very focused on Local Heavens, and I am going on sub with it next year. I don't exactly know when. The revisions that I'm making are not as intensive as they were for draft 2. So I'm going to be probably done with these revisions very, very soon. So yeah, once I'm on submission with this book, I can finally stop tinkering with it. I can get it out of my head. I'm going to be very excited to work on whatever the frick I want to work on next. So I am very much looking forward to being out of a revision phase with this book and not having to tether so much of my identity to one book. When I eventually do go on submission, it's probably something that I will update in my newsletter. I am quite nervous about going on submission. It does get realer and realer by the day. I truly never thought that I would be going on submission with the most ridiculous book idea ever. Like, it's so... I think I always kind of envisioned myself, wading into publishing waters for the first time with a book like one of my fantasy works, like something that I would feel like is very tailored to the market. This book is like, so I keep thinking of all of these reasons why it's like not a good idea to like try to make this my debut work. And I just don't know how and where it will fit in the market. All I know is that I had to write it in order to like feel sane. While the book is still in my hands, I am sort of cherishing this time that I've spent with this world and with this character, because I don't think that he is a character I'm going to write again. I tend to really enjoy my dual POV, my ensemble cast. It's just fun being able to like jump through a lot of different heads. But I have enjoyed writing him. Such a challenge. But yeah, all in all, it has been fun to be able to write a story that is just unapologetically cyberpunk, infused with a lot of my fears and anxieties around the corporate life and late stage capitalism and technology. I don't think I've ever written a heteronormative story before, but I think one thing that has been fun with Local Heavens is that I'm able to kind of write this character who, I don't want to say he's caught in a love triangle, but I would say about half the book, he is kind of like, he has a romantic relationship with like two people at once. Not that he's cheating on them, but I think it's like he has two situationships going on at the same time. One with a man, one with a woman. There's a lot of messy romantic relationships in this book. So from that perspective, I think Local Heavens has been such an interesting challenge to write. But it's been very fun kind of navigating his feelings. The other book that I started working on this year, I brainstormed it, outlined it, and I'm about 3 chapters in. It's not like close to being done. I literally just started it. An adult fantasy work. It's called The Floating House. Floating House is a sort of revamped version of Nightward, which is an adult fantasy that I wrote last year. I originally was planning on querying Nightward, but when I reached the end of the first draft, I wasn't happy with it. I felt in my bones that there was something fundamentally lacking about both the plot and the magic system. And so I tried revising it, and then I ended up shelving it in order to work on Local Heavens. I kind of realized that I just didn't really have a clear thematic direction. Like, I didn't quite know what I was trying to say. And I think at the end of the day, the exploration of colonialism and the idea of like writing a revolution story, it wasn't really clicking for me. After a lot of contemplation, it has now turned into The Floating House, where I have rewritten the cast, I've rewritten the magic system, I've rewritten the plot. There are elements of the world that are staying the same, but it is very much a different book. And I think the biggest change that I actually made to it is that I really wanted to make these characters have to grapple with the ways in which they are affected by colonialism and occupation, but also the ways that they benefit from the system. And instead of setting it in a kind of secondary world that is inspired by the Philippines, it's still set in a secondary world, but it's not set in a world that is as analogous to the real life world, like actual Philippines. And the reason for that, the reason that I decided to do that is twofold. I think the first one is that as a diaspora writer, I was a lot more intrigued to explore what it means to be diaspora. Those are the kinds of changes that I've made so far. I also have been having a lot of feelings about where the line between exploring a culture and exploiting a culture for narrative material is. Like, where is that fine line? And I want to be able to write a story that doesn't feel like I have to perform or put on stage for a white Western audience, like as if like I am a tour guide to a white Western audience for Filipino culture, which I feel like sometimes BIPOC writers can even unintentionally feel the need that they have to do. I think once Local Heavens is out the door, I'm gonna kind of return to it, have it be my little fun project, because I think it will be fun. It's like sort of set in a early 20th century inspired setting, which is a period that I love exploring in general. I think it'll be really cool. And there's just gonna be some like fun shenanigans. There are actually two more short stories that I worked on this year. I don't know if I will publish them. Finished kind of writing the first drafts of them. So both of them are science fiction. One of them is called The Fish Can't Leave, and it's kind of like a cyberpunk heist piece. It's about this like crew of criminals, I guess, in the far, far future. And it takes place like in Manila. And it's these like crew of criminals that are trying to steal something from a hotel. And when they get to the supposed thing that they want to steal, there's like a twist. So it was a very fun piece to write. Again, I don't know if I want to publish it. I wrote it over the course of many, many months. Like I would write a few paragraphs, a scene, and then I would like shelve it for months or weeks at a time. And I don't think it's my best writing, even though I do love the idea of it. So I may or may not take it off the shelf. Other piece that I started writing recently is called I'm Taking the Next One, and it is sci-fi, but it's kind of like near future sci-fi. A little bit of dating app culture, but mostly just this idea of modern day loneliness, what it means to basically give your life up to data and algorithms. And when you start to see life in that way, you start to not believe in like serendipity, what happens when it turns you into a cynical person. So those are kinds of the ideas that I wanted to explore in that piece. And I've written a very rough first draft. It's a little bit more of a zero draft, but I do like it. At some point next year, I want to find potentially some revisions that I can make to it so that I could potentially publish it, because I do feel like it's very zeitgeisty. There's not much else to say about that, but that's kind of something that I have been working on. So yeah, that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for joining me today on this writing wrap up. Happy end of the year, happy holidays. I've accomplished a lot of things this year that I didn't think I would accomplish. And next year, I hope to accomplish more things. We'll see. Thank you for watching, as always, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.